Genesis chapter 34 tonight. And we're going to look at the whole chapter, so gird up your loins, if you can find those, wherever those are. Prepare yourself for action. Genesis 34. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he took her and he lay with her by force. He was deeply attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the girl, and he spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father, Hamor, saying, "Get me this young girl for a wife." Now Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter, but his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob kept silent until they came in. Then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. Now the sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard it, what he had done. The men were grieved and they were very angry because he had done such a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing ought not to be done. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage. Intermarry with us, give your daughters to us, take our daughters for yourself. Thus you shall live with us, and the land shall be open before you. Live and trade in it, and acquire property in it." Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, "If I find favor in your sight, then I will give whatever you say to me. Ask me ever so much bridal payment and gift, and I will give according as you say to me. But give me the girl in marriage." But Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor with deceit, because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. They said to them, "We cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised. That would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we consent to you. If you will become like us in that every male of you be circumcised, then we'll give our daughters to you, and we'll take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live with you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us to be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and go." Now their words seemed reasonable to Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. The young man did not delay to do the thing because he was so delighted with Jacob's daughter. Now he was more respected, Shechem was, than all the household of his father. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of the city and spoke to the men of the city, saying, "These men are friendly with us. Therefore let them live in the land and trade in it. For behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters in marriage and give our daughters to them. Only on this condition will the men consent to live with us, be one with us, that every male among us be circumcised as they are. Will not their livestock and their property and all their animals be ours? Only let us consent to them, and they will live with us." All who went out of the gate of his city listened to Hamor and to his son Shechem. Every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of the city. Now it came about on the third day, when they were in pain, that two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came upon the city unawares, and they killed every male. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword, and they took Dinah from Shechem's house, and they went forth. Jacob's sons came upon the slain. They looted the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks, their herds, their donkeys, and that which was in the city and that which was in the field. And they captured and looted all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives, even all that was in the house. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me stink," literally in Hebrew, "making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And my men, being few in number, they will gather together against me and attack me, and I will be destroyed, I and my household." But they said, "Should he treat our sister as a harlot?" Well, Father, this is a tough time in Jacob's family's life. And Lord, I thank you that you have a purpose for us to read it, to know it happened, Lord, to understand what it means. So teach us things that will help us to walk through this life, trust you with things that are tragic and devastating, the effects of sin, Lord. Thank you that you've called us together tonight to worship you and to remember that you're in charge of our lives and that we can learn how to walk with you in a way that will honor you and be a blessing to ourselves and our families. In Jesus' name, help us. Amen. You can be seated. Well, I know it's a long chapter, but I read something like that, And it's a hard chapter to think about what happened there. Maybe I want to start out just by asking this question. Why do you think God includes things like that in the Bible? It's not a happy chapter. A lesson? Okay. What do we learn from a chapter like that? These are some things that we have to deal with in life, grievous things. Yeah. To remind us of our sinful nature. To reveal our character. Okay. Teach us the consequence of sin. I mean, obviously God could have left this out. There's a lot of things, years go by and he doesn't say anything about it, and then all of a sudden he records this, and a lot of detail about it. And it's like, okay, the Lord wants us to not only know this happened, but he wants us to understand some things as a result of it. God records hard things about his people that aren't pretty. And this is God's chosen family. This is Jacob. He's Israel. God's with him. In fact, he's chosen him above everybody else on the whole earth. And this stuff's going on in his life, and it's ugly. I'll tell you one truth that we draw out of stuff like this. There's only one hero in the Bible, and his name is Jesus. It's not Jacob or Abraham or Isaac or any of the others. It's just Jesus that comes out smelling like a rose every time. There's one hero, but there are truths to encourage us in our own walk with the Lord. You see, in Genesis, we're going to find, we already have, but we're going to continue to find, God kind of places some serious emphasis on certain things again and again. One of them is heredity. That's why there's genealogies in the Bible. God is concerned about family. He created family. And not only is he concerned about heredity in the scriptures, but he's concerned about who his people marry. He really is. He is going to give us rules later in the law, but even in the book of Genesis, he does not want his people that believe in him marrying people who do not believe in him. That's why we see this with Abraham, with his son. We're going to get from my own relatives who believe in Jehovah, we're not going to have him marry one of these Canaanite women, remember? That was true. So the servant goes off to get a wife for Isaac. And of course, that was Rebekah. And then same thing with Isaac's son, right? Jacob winds up getting his wife from Haran, again, who is Rachel, and Leah comes along with the deal. But very interesting, this idea of intermarriage, and it plays into this passage where at one point it looks like they're going to intermarry with the Canaanite people, something that God was dead set against. And the whole city of Shechem there was going to intermarry with the Israelites. That would have destroyed God's plan to bring the Messiah. Another thing that we see again and again in the book of Genesis is God's emphasis on the family. And that frankly, in every family, there are problems. If you're in a family, you've got family problems. Oh, I know they ebb and flow, and maybe compared to some others, you're doing great, but for everybody, I don't care whose family you're in, even after you're in God's family, you're going to have trouble with your own family. And I was thinking about this. If it's just starting from the beginning of the Bible, you know, as parents, how many of us are parents in the room? You're blessed to have children. Well, then if you're blessed to have children, you've started or you already realize God has brought you children not just because he wanted to bless you, but because he wanted to grow you. Children are a gift of the Lord in many ways, but they are also his way to train us up, to challenge us. Perhaps nothing will challenge your faith in God. I think marriage will challenge it, but not at the same way children will. And you go back in the Bible, and Adam and Eve had two sons. One was a martyr, first martyr, and the other was the first murderer who made him a martyr. Adam and Eve literally raised Cain. I mean, that's what they did. You have Noah, who has three sons, but one of them is Ham, who remember, mocked his father, and a curse came on his son, Ham's son, as a result. You have Abraham has two sons, and one of them is Ishmael, a man after the flesh that God's blessing is not on. And then Isaac has Esau and Jacob, and Esau is a man of the flesh, a man of the world, not a godly man. We've studied him, and as you go through the scriptures, you see it again and again. You see Samuel, who has 2 sons who are in the ministry, but they're godless. They don't even know the Lord. And even though Samuel was on fire for the Lord, he's a godly man, his boys are not. And you get to David, and David's a great king. He's not a great father. He has real problems with his children. He's not an example to us the way he raises his children and the problems within his family. So here's my point, is that God wants to talk a lot about family, and he wants us to see the problems that his chosen people had in their families, in part, I think, to give us a little bit of, compassion for them, but also to realize, okay, I'm not alone. It doesn't mean God's not in my family because I'm having struggles in my family. There are 3 chapters in the book of Genesis which are particularly dark and sad. This is one of them. We will find, because this is the first one we're going to study, that all 3 of them happen to involve the sons of Leah. Simeon and Levi in this particular chapter. In the next chapter, chapter 35, it'll actually be Reuben. He's the firstborn of Leah, and he'll be involved in sexual sin, and we'll get to that later, and then chapter 38, Judah, who is her last biological child. She had some through her handmaid, but her last child was Judah, and he also commits sexual sin. It's very interesting. So we're going to see sexual sin here, not from the sons. They're going to do something far greater than that. They're going to murder a whole city. But there are some principles we can draw out of this hard, dark time. And by the way, when God reveals darkness, it really is to encourage us. Did anybody know why Jesus set up his ministry up in Galilee rather than in Jerusalem, where the temple was? Why did Jesus start his preaching ministry up in the north, up in Galilee? Anybody know? Well, it was to fulfill prophecy. The people who live in darkness will see a great light. The Galilee of the Gentiles, you see, where the Babylonians had come in and intermixed with the people, and it wasn't very kosher. That's why you have some of the things going on up there that were going on. Jesus does not start his ministry in holy zip code Jerusalem and Judea, but up there in the dark parts. That's where the light needs to shine forth. And so when we read chapters like this, just know God is not trying to bum you out. He's trying to give you hope and warnings and encouragement for our own life. So if you're filling in the blanks or taking down notes, the first principle is this: we need to be where God calls us to be. We need to go and be where God calls us to be. Now, I say that because we need to remember where Jacob's family is. They're in this city of Shechem. Actually, in verse 18 of chapter 33, now Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem. Some of you have Shalom. It's the word safely translated, which is in the land of Canaan. Now, here's the deal, though. Where did God tell him to go when he left Haran? Was it Shechem? You're gathering the answer is no. Where was he supposed to go? Home. Go home. By the way, in the very first verse of the next chapter, God's going to speak to him and say, go to Bethel. And Bethel was where he met the Lord 20 years earlier, on his way back into the promised land. Go back to where you and I kind of started a relationship. But he had sent him home, which was in Beersheba, to be with his family. And he told him to go. Now, what's interesting is he's not just on his way and he stops in Shechem for a hot dog at the AM PM. He's been living there for 8 to 10 years. He built a house. Remember, he's supposed to be living in a tent. No, he is compromising all the way, and he has pitched his tent toward Shechem, which should remind you of another verse back in Genesis 19. Remember when Lot went out from Abraham, and it says he pitched his tent toward what? Sodom, or I call it Sodom. He pitched his tent toward Sodom, and the next time we see him, well, he's not toward Sodom, he's living there. And here, Jacob did not go where God told him to go, so put this principle down. Don't stop short of fully obeying God's direction in your life. You do so at your own peril. Genesis 33:18 is the verse where God communicates it. You can jot it down. Now, Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem. I just read it, which is in the land of Canaan. So he is in the promised land, but he camped before the city, and he just stayed there. He didn't fully obey God's command to return to the land. Now, it's an interesting passage. We won't take the time to read it, but just to remind you the story, it's in 1 Samuel 15, where God gives a command to King Saul through his prophet Samuel. And the command is to go and utterly wipe out the Amalekites. The Amalekites were God's people's archenemy. They had opposed them when they had come out of Egypt, and God said there's going to be battles because of the Amalekites attacking his people, and eventually we're going to wipe them out. And interestingly, King Saul goes, and he wipes out most of the Amalekites. In fact, the only one that seems to have lived is who? The king. Well, how did he live? Because, Saul spared him. And his name was Agag. I don't know, that sounds kind of funny to us, but his name was Agag. And so he captures Agag and he brings him alive like a war trophy back from the battle, wipes out all the people. Oh, he also kept alive the animals, at least some of them. And he was told to wipe all the animals out. Now, you can ask why, but the fact is that was God's command. Wipe out all their animals. Don't keep any of their animals. But he chooses some of the animals to bring back with him. And God tells Samuel, I've rejected Saul, while Saul is even still on the mission, because he is not obeying me. And here's the thing, he almost completely obeyed the Lord. Just one guy, a few animals? Come on, what's the big deal? Oh, but you should read what God has to say about it. Incomplete obedience is just another word for complete disobedience as far as God is concerned. And God says, I cannot use him. I'm done with him because he has compromised my will. We need to be careful. When God tells us to go somewhere and we go close, we go toward it, but we stop, we are putting ourselves in harm's way. The things that we read in this chapter, here's my point, we would not be reading. This dark chapter would not be part of Jacob's life if he had simply done what God told him to do. We bring things into our life, hurts and hurtful things into our families because we don't completely obey the Lord. Put this down. We need to protect our kids from a wicked world. Now, in our text, read verse 1. Look at your Bible. Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom he had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. Now, the daughters of the land are Canaanites. Now, some have said, well, she had all these brothers, had 11 brothers. She probably got tired of hanging out with the guys and, thought I got some, go see some chick flicks or, I don't know, go hang out at the boutiques or go be with some women. We don't know why. We just know that this is not going to turn out good. But she's going out among unbelievers, intending, supposedly, to visit the daughters of the land. Only we don't read about her building any friendships with any of the girls. His vulnerable daughter, she's probably a teenager, by the way, at this stage, maybe 15 years old, 16 years old, is going to be taken advantage of because where she was allowed to be. We need to remember God has entrusted us with his children, our children, and we've got to be careful as we're raising children and grandchildren in terms of where we let children go. To simply go where they will go on their own is not going to be wise. Not just physically. In our day and age, they can be sitting in their bedroom. Technologically. You know what they're calling the modern, it's not Gen X anymore. I think it's Gen Y or something. They call them screenagers. They are screenagers. In other words, their whole life, from the time they're super young, my grandson, he knows how to do an iPad. He's 18 months. Yeah, no, I say they know how to swipe before they know how to wipe. It's true, absolutely true. He knows the difference between an iPhone and an Android. He won't mess with your Android. Give me that iPhone or nothing. Oh, yeah, no, I'm not. Anyway, they're called screenagers. We are responsible to protect our children from what they do not know about a wicked world. Now, the whole passage kind of starts innocent enough. She wants to visit the daughters of the land, but it will lead to her being defiled as she goes out, evidently, on her own. Now, children who are over-sheltered many times become inquisitive and can become rebellious. Children, though, that are under-sheltered sheltered by their parents often and most often become defiled. You know, in the book of Psalms, it speaks of the privilege of raising children and the gift that they are. You know, when it says there in Psalm 127, unless the Lord builds the city, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. And then he talks about children. It's about family. That whole chapter, actually, Psalm 127 and 128. And I like what it says. It says that a man who has many children is like a mighty warrior, and children are like arrows in a quiver in the hands of a warrior. He won't be ashamed when he speaks to his enemies in the gates. Cool passage, you know. But if you think about it, arrows are put into a warrior's quiver, but that's not ultimately what arrows are for. I needed something to fill my quiver. My quiver was so empty. No. They're only there for a while until they're ready to be shot out. But a quiver is something that is kept very near and a safe place. Children are intended by God to be given to parents to be protected until they're ready to be shot out. Jesus said concerning children that if anyone stumbles one of these little ones, it would be better for them to have a millstone hung around their neck and to be cast into the depths of the sea. We need to be careful we don't allow our children to be stumbled. Doing our best does not mean that they won't be influenced by the world. It means we have a job to do. The idea that the world is a safe place, we live in America, or a neutral zone. Our world, no matter where you are in it, has completely different values than you do if you're a born-again Christian. And by the way, a completely different ruler than God, according to Scriptures. There's a God of this world, and he is our enemy. The Christian life is not about playing chicken with evil. How close can we get to it without being wiped out? But he's not where he's supposed to be. He stopped short of where he was supposed to be. He's camped toward Shechem, and now Dinah is going to be where evil takes its first bite. Put this down. Lust can give a believable impersonation of love. Look at the text with me. Verse 2, when Shechem, that is both a city and the name of the son of the king, when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, so he's royalty, saw her, he took her and he lay with her by force. We have another word for that. It's called rape. Then it says this, he was deeply attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl, and he spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, get me this young girl for a wife. I read an article, it's in the newspaper today, maybe you even saw it. A woman, this is over in Great Britain, was abused sexually and raped along with 50 other people in her town. And finally, the man responsible for abusing her, raping her, went to prison. Don't ask me how this is happening. There's some provision in the code that is giving this convicted rapist, who, by the way, got her pregnant, the right to have parental visitation with the child that he conceived in her. Yeah, that's a law that just kind of needs to change. The article said she was 14 when she met him, and she's being devastated by the fact that they're going to him in prison saying, do you want to have a relationship with your son that you conceived through rape? Is it just me, or something seems very wrong about any kind of a law that would do that? They're calling it as human rights. You know, the world doesn't use the word sin. God uses that word. Hey, these things happen, it's not a big deal. He seems to be pretty cavalier about the whole thing. He rapes her, but because he loves her, hey, we can make all this thing work. Remember, I'm a prince. I can provide for her. In fact, name your price. It's not a big deal. The world kind of takes the letter S off of the word sin. It's just, hey, that's just what's in, you know. So that's the way things work around here. By the way, the name Shechem is interesting, this young man's name. His name means burden. He is the son of Hamor. Hamor means an ass. Look it up. He's the son of the ass. That is literally who he is. So first, donkey boy satisfies his lust physically. Now he seeks to satisfy his lust emotionally and relationally. How interested do you think Dinah would be in marrying her rapist? But I just love her so much. No, you love yourself, Shechem. First, you steal her virginity and her innocence. Now you want to negotiate stealing the rest of her life? By the way, the language that he uses as he tells Dad, get me that one. It's not deja vu, but it will be when you get to the book of Judges. Jot down Judges 14, verses 1 through 3. Tell me this is not written with this passage in mind that we're studying. Then Samson went down to Timnah among the Philistines. He saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. So he came back and he told his father and mother, I saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me as a wife. Then his father and his mother said to him, is there no woman among the daughters of your relatives or among all our people that you go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? Couldn't we try mingle? But Samson said to his father, get her for me, for she looks good to me. There is the same spirit in Samson ordering mom and dad, me want. Sounds like a caveman, you know. Me want now. And of course they do. That marriage doesn't work out very well either. So the first principle that I want you to start with is, Lord, if you tell me to do something, I don't want to go halfway. I don't want to go sort of. I want to go fully there. I don't want to put myself in a place where unnecessary temptation or hurt is going to come to me and my family. The second principle, letter B on your outline, is failure to lead means misleading your family. If we fail to lead. Now, you can jot this down because I just want to kind of read through these verses and you'll see it. There is a time to be silent and a time to speak up. This is Ecclesiastes. When at chapter 3 it says there's a time for every purpose under heaven. There's a time to shut up and there's a time to speak up. And of course, a lot of us, our problems are we get them mixed up, right? We speak up when we shouldn't, right? And we shut up when we shouldn't. And in our text, I want you to see in verse 5, now Jacob heard that Shechem had defiled his daughter. This is an interesting phrase to me. But his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob did what? Well, he just kept silent until they came in. Since my sons are out there with the sheep in the field, I have nothing to say. And I say, what? You're her father, but you have nothing to say because your boys aren't there? What is it you are waiting for? By the way, no phrase about his concern for his daughter. It doesn't say he comforts her or he wants to go talk to her. Nothing. Not a word about his concern for what happened to her. We don't read him praying, asking the Lord for direction and help. We don't even hear of him sending for his sons so that he can get their help if that's what he's waiting for. He says nothing. And he does nothing. He sits on his hands with his mouth closed. I believe Jacob's son's sin that we'll read about in the chapter, we already know what they're going to do, is provoked by dad's inaction. He does nothing. Why was he so slow to respond? We don't know because the Bible doesn't tell us. We kind of have to guess, so we aren't sure. Maybe he thought, well, I need to be careful. After all, I'm in their city. There's more of them than me. Maybe he thought, well, this guy, he's a prince. Who am I? Can I tell you this? Royalty is not an immunity from criminality, whether in ancient Shechem or in modern-day Saudi Arabia. David's daughter, later in Scripture, King David's daughter, Tamar, will be raped by her half-brother, Amnon. Sordid things are going to keep happening in the family of God's chosen. And you know what? Amnon is David's eldest son, and he loves him. He's supposed to be on the throne after David, David thinks. And after Tamar is raped, you know what? David never expresses any concern at all for Tamar. He never does anything. He never punishes him at all. You know what that causes? Another son, the brother of Tamar, named Absalom, to start hating his father. And he kills Amnon. Goes out and it's a repeat of our chapter. Because dad doesn't lead, somebody's going to fill the void. Something's got to be done. This is wrong. Down to the core of their bones, they know this is wrong. And sometimes we think we're being so kind by not speaking up when something needs to be said in defense of the person who has been injured. We see absolutely no confession of wrong by Shechem in the text. He never admits he's done anything wrong or says anything about it. Though the Bible's very clear, he raped her. There is neither repentance or any kind of an explanation. Just basically, if you read the text, he invites Israel and the family of Israel to play, let's make a deal. He kind of just skims over what happened, and now, well, I just want you to know I love her. Doesn't that make it all okay? No, it doesn't make it okay at all. In fact, it really, for me, brings into question the reality of what you're saying. You love her so much, what? You think you know, sometimes people think they love somebody. They're convinced, I love them so much, I just can't see why they don't love me back. Well, a lot of times we think we love people because what we really feel is we want to be loved by them. We want them to love us. But I'm being driven, all I can think about anything else. Well, you can lust for someone physically. You can lust for them emotionally too. That does not make it a godly love. In fact, the text becomes very clear. It's all about money. When they go to Jacob and his sons, they start talking about, look, why don't we figure this out? Tell us what you want. We have all the money we need. You just tell me, we'll fill out the check right now. And by the way, that will be very offensive later on, we find out, to the sons of Jacob. The last verse said, they're treating her like a harlot, like somebody you buy. Are you kidding me? This is our sister. But Jacob is not outraged at the offer. We don't see him weeping. He doesn't utter a word in the text. In fact, you see what happens. Jacob waits for his sons to come back. Then the interaction is all between Shechem, Hamor, and Jacob's sons. Find me one thing that Jacob says in the interaction. Not a word. In fact, you know who else doesn't talk? The oldest brother, Reuben. Nope, got nothing to say either. Just like Dad, I'm just kind of not sure what to do with this one. Now, Simeon and Levi, not the eldest, not the youngest, the middle sons, are the ones who are going to come up with a plan. In fact, as you read the text, it's kind of like, it reads almost like Jacob isn't, he's there, but he's not there. I wonder how many children have been wounded, first of all, by their parents' permissiveness, but then devastated again by the apparent apathy of their parents when the damage has come into their life. But that's what's going on here. Jacob's got nothing really to say. Not too upset about it. Just trying to figure out what to do about it. Well, put this down. Beware of self-centered self-righteousness. Self-centered self-righteousness. In verse 13, you can jot it down. These boys are masters of deception. Verse 13. But Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor with deceit because he defiled Dinah, their sister. We jot down Micah chapter 7, verses 2 and 3. Listen to God's indictment of his people. The godly person has perished from the land, and there is no upright person among men. This is Micah the prophet talking about why God's going to judge the nation. Godly person has perished. There's no upright person. All of them lie in wait for bloodshed. Sound familiar here? Each of them hunts the other with a net. Concerning evil, both hands do it well. The prince asks, also the judge, for a bribe, and a great man speaks the desire of his soul, so they weave it together. Or you might say they wrap it up with a nice little bow and finish the job. And that's exactly what's going on here. You read of these sons, their response, they're angry. They hide that. You guys want to talk business deal? Okay, good idea. We have an idea how we could do some business. You might say these sons of Jacob, well, you know the old expression, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree? What do we know about Jacob? He is a deceiver. That's what he was from the very beginning. One who gets what he wants through deceit. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. It won't be the last time. Remember, his sons will deceive him later about Joseph. Oh, we found this robe. It's full of blood. I don't know. What do you think, Dad? Oh, no. A wild animal must have killed my son. Oh, yeah. He deceived his father, remember? He'll be deceived. But here he watches his sons ply their trade that they have no doubt inherited from watching the way their dad dealt with Laban and other circumstances that came his way. Put this down. They invite desecration of circumcision. Now, we as Christians look at circumcision and we realize, according to the Apostle Paul, circumcision is not something that commends anyone to God. It's an outward expression of an inward reality, kind of like baptism. It was a physical mark that God gave to Abraham and his descendants to demonstrate privately in their own private life, I am set apart for the Lord. It was the removal of the flesh, we talk about not living for the flesh. We're circumcised in spirit, the Bible says, in Christ. Christ has circumcised us for the Lord. So we have a spiritual circumcision. So we look at physical circumcision, well, that's a rite or a religious practice of the Jews that we don't practice. And Paul says if somebody who's a Christian goes and thinks he has to go get circumcised to be commended to God, they've fallen from grace. You're trying to earn your way to heaven. Don't do that. Realize that we're forgiven. But here in the book of Genesis, this is very much a vital expression of faith for Abraham and Isaac and Jacob to have their boys circumcised when they're born. The Gentiles did not do that. And it was the special rite of saying, my children are God's. They're set apart. They're holy for the Lord. And they tell these Gentiles in Shechem, here's what you got to do. You want to become one with us? You know what? Well, we'd be open to that. But you got to become Jewish, if you will. You got to be, of course, these guys don't even believe in Jehovah God. Doesn't matter. Just go through the motions. Can I tell you, God's never excited about people going through the motions. Well, just get baptized. Go through the church class and just pretend you're Mark Twain fell in love with a young Christian woman and wanted to marry her in the 1800s. That day you had to ask mom and dad. But her parents were Christians. And they, clearly it's like, not unless you believe in Jesus are you going to marry our daughter. And so Mark Twain converted. Mark Twain got saved. Mark Twain started going to church till right after they were married. And then he admitted, just did that to get married. Just a hoop I had to jump through. I don't really believe like you do, honey. And his wife, who was a strong believer, became extremely depressed and discouraged in her faith. She actually would wind up walking away and denying the Lord. See, here's the thing. If you put people through the motions, or if you go through the motions, it is so offensive to the Lord. You're desecrating something that's supposed to be precious. It'd be like marrying somebody, but then afterwards going, psych! Who would do that? But they take this precious gift that God gave his people, and the sons use it as a deceptive way to be able to make them vulnerable. You know what's interesting to me is that the sons of Shechem, or Shechem and Hamor, the father, would talk about money. How much money is this going to take? We can make this all go away and make it all good. Now, what does that tell you? I want to suggest that tells you that they assume that Jacob's sons and Jacob must have the same priorities they have. It's all about the almighty shekel when it comes right down to it. You remember, we've talked about this before, that Jewish family who went to synagogue every Shabbat, every Saturday, and raised the kids to believe. And the father was a strong believer until they moved to a city in Germany that didn't have a synagogue. There wasn't a Jewish community there. And this particular town they moved to was Lutheran. And Dad came home and said, "We're all Lutherans." And they looked at each other like, "What?" "Yep, we're going to start going to the Lutheran church starting this Sunday." And the son said, "Why? Thought we were Jewish." He said, "Well, it's going to be better for business." A lot of people, the whole community is Lutheran. That boy so resented his father's hypocrisy. His name is Karl Marx, that boy, who wrote of a system, a philosophy of life where economics dictates everything in this world. It's all about the money. Number 3 on your outline, they seek revenge using rationalization. Verse 25, it came about on the 3rd day when the town who had agreed to it, the men had agreed to this, all being circumcised, they were in pain, that 2 of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword, came upon the city unawares, and they killed every single male in the town. This is the first record of a mass murder in the Bible. They killed Hamor, his son Shechem, with the edge of the sword. They took Dinah, so evidently she had been kind of kept by him all this time, from Shechem's house, and they went forth. Jacob's sons came. Notice, they didn't just stop with killing Shechem, the perpetrator. They killed his dad, but they go on, verse 27, they came upon the slain. They looted the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks, their herds, their donkeys, that which was in the city and that which was in the field. They captured and looted all their wealth, all their little ones, all their wives, even all that was in the houses. So they don't just stop this killing spree with the perpetrator of the crime and dad, who didn't commit the crime. But they start killing just every man that has nothing to do with the crime. And they steal everything. They take the wives and the children, they make them slaves, they steal all their money, they took everything. It's like a war. This is the booty for a battle. That's how they treated it. Look, when we're wronged, it's only natural to want to see somebody else suffer for it. It is. It's natural. It's not natural to forgive. It's not natural to understand. It's natural to say somebody needs to pay, and if nobody's going to make them pay, I am. You touching my truck, I break your face. You seen that bumper sticker? I don't get mad, I get even. We all are familiar with that. Listen to this. A letter to a neighbor reads, "Dear Frank, we've been neighbors for 6 tumultuous years. When you borrowed my tiller, you returned it in pieces. When I was sick, you blasted rap music. And when your dog went to the bathroom all over my lawn, you laughed. I could go on, but I'm certainly not one to hold grudges. So I'm writing this letter to tell you that your house is on fire. Cordially, Bob." That's what it says. Letter, house on. Okay. Jimmy Hoffa is quoted once as saying this: "I do it to them before they do it to me, only worse." That was his version of the golden rule. I do it to them before they do it to me, only worse. Well, how'd that work out for you, Jimmy? See, that he's going beyond revenge. He's doing pre-revenge. Basically, might as well do it sooner because I know they're going to do it to me if they ever get a chance. I want to pay them back. Jot down Ephesians 2 and verse 3, if you would. Paul is talking about all of us before we were saved. He said, among them, the Gentiles, we too all formerly lived in the lusts of our flesh. That's just how we were governed by our physical, mental, emotional desires. We lived in the lusts of our flesh. We indulged the desires of the flesh. And by the way, the desires of the mind. I see that both in Shechem here. The desires of the flesh and the desires of the mind. I want to be married to her. And we're by nature children of wrath, even as the rest. But James 1:20 talks about our anger. James 1:20, the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. You kind of sense that as they go into killing Shechem, maybe they only started with the intention of killing the perpetrator. I don't know. If so, why did they have everybody circumcised? So they wouldn't maybe be able to defend them? But something happens either as they get started or was their intention from the beginning, they wipe them all out. It's almost like we don't care who gets hurt in the process. We're going to get justice. It's kind of weird. It's kind of like we don't care how much injustice we're going to commit to get justice. Do you remember what happened when the Rodney King trial? Well, really, the police officers who were accused were acquitted in the Rodney King trial. If you lived here, you probably were watching TV as the riot started. And an uninvolved construction worker named Reginald Denny, who just happens to be at an intersection, but he's white, is yanked out of that vehicle and nearly killed on the streets. Why? Because he's white. Somebody white is going to pay for this right now. That's what's going on there. There's that same spirit of hatred that's in our text. Nothing less than murder under the guise of piety. You guys got to get circumcised, be right with God, like us, so we can kill you. The Crusades, there were 8 of them, by the way, and they started with the mindset of taking back the promised land from the infidels, from the Muslims who had been there for some time. And actually, somewhere in the misguided teaching of the church, in fact, it was Pope Urban, to be specific, said, it's not really a sin to kill people who aren't believers. Yeah, he actually said that. So in 1096, when the First Crusade started and the knights from France and Germany set out to go to Jerusalem and to the Holy Land to free the Holy Land from these infidels, they realized, well, wait a minute. There's a bunch of unbelievers right here in France, right here in Germany. You see, they had all been told, you kill an infidel, you save your soul. You kill an unbeliever for the Lord, and you'll go to heaven. They actually believed that. That's what they were told. But there were communities of Jews, not Muslims, Jews, where they lived. So before they ever got to the Promised Land, they started slaughtering Jews on their way to the Promised Land. When they got to Jerusalem, this is the first crusade. They got to Jerusalem, they rounded up 1,000 Jews, put them in the temple, they burned it down, and sang Christian hymns as they watched it burn to the ground. How does that happen? How do you get that sick that you think you're doing God's just, righteous war, whole-scale murdering? But it's happening here in Jacob's family. How deception, how evil Satan is. He's a liar. That's what whenever he speaks, Jesus said he lies and can deceive people in doing some of the most crazy things. But I would say this, and I think it's true. All of us are most prone to justify doing wrong, listen to me, when we've been wronged. Oh, not on this kind of level, maybe. But when somebody does something wrong to us and we know that was wrong, there's something inside of us that feels like, oh, okay, now. Isn't that what happens? Two kids are fighting and one of them is crying, what happened? He hit me. 2 seconds later, he hit me first. Well, she spit at me. Well, he pulled my hair. Okay, I don't know where this all started, but every one of them is going to justify what they did based on, he looked at me funny. It's just our nature. When somebody does something wrong, we feel amazingly justified in handling it, but many times we justify handling it wrong. Shechem raped an Israelite. The Israelites slaughtered the Shechemites. Who converted who? Interesting at the end of the chapter, and it's still a sad day. The whole chapter is sad. Where Jacob's focus is. I want you to see the end of it. Look at verse 30. After this bloodbath is over, then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, the two sons who deceived and perpetrated this killing, you have brought trouble. It's on me. By making me. You just want to underline every time the word me or I shows up. 4 me's, 2 I's. You have brought trouble on me by making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and my men being few in number, they will gather together against me and attack me. Sounds like he's all by himself. And I will be destroyed, I and my household. I would say Jacob has eye trouble. It's all about him. It's not about his daughter. Really not about his witness for the Lord. It's not about the Lord at all. It's all about me. And he doesn't see any fault in anything he did that started it out yet. He doesn't say, well, I shouldn't have been here. What was I doing here? She shouldn't have had that. Should have never happened to her. I should have never let her out of my sight among the Canaanites. Nope, not a thought about that. Jacob is not concerned about the injustice done to his daughter or those others in the town. Just about one thing. How what has happened will affect the way people look at him and think about him. Can I say this to you? If you have to keep from speaking up about sin to be in the group you're in, to be like, I can't talk about that because that would offend them. And if you have to keep yourself from speaking up about sin to be in the in-group, you're in the wrong group. And then the final truth just to put down is don't settle for Shechem when God has called you back to Bethel. This chapter is a sad chapter, but my point that I want to leave you with is it just didn't have to be here. Let me put it a different way. There are chapters in our life. Now, you can't go back and rewrite them. The good news, there is some good news here. It's just not in this chapter. But it's about this chapter, is that while you can't rewrite some of these dark chapters of your own life, God can redeem them. We won't be able to take the time tonight to learn how, but just one final passage you can jot down. It's Genesis 49, verses 5 through 7. Now we are fast forwarding to the end of Jacob's life. He's dying and he's going to bless his sons, put a blessing on each one. This is what Simeon and Levi get. Years later, this is all Dad has to say about them. Simeon, he's just been blessing. Simeon and Levi, your brothers, their swords are implements of violence. Let my soul not enter into their counsel. Let my glory not be united with their assembly, because in their anger they slew men, and in their self-will they lamed oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will disperse them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. This was a prophecy concerning the future of their families. They will be utterly scattered in the promised land, which is just, you say, that's the good news? No. The good news is going to be when we get to Genesis 49, I'll tell you the way God fulfilled that prophecy of doom, because he absolutely fulfills it but he redeems it into a blessing. I'll give you a sneak peek. How did God disperse the Levites in the promised land? They weren't given territory, the tribe of Levi. They were given cities in every tribe. Why? Because when Moses said, when he came down from the golden calf, he's up in the mountain, he comes down and the people are in disarray. He says, who is on the Lord's side? Let him come to me. God's going to execute judgment among his people. And the Levites put their swords on and showed up ready to be on the Lord's side. And they went out and they killed the perpetrators of that. From that day on, God said, you're mine. I'm going to treat you. Everybody else has an inheritance of land. Your inheritance is me. You're going to minister to me from now on. You're going to be the priests. God fulfilled it. They're scattered, but in a wonderful way. What about Simeon? That's for another time. But I love that story even better. God will redeem what was meant for a curse. Their legacy is horrible, but the Lord, his grace, is able to even take the curse and reverse it into a blessing. That's true for the chapters we can't rewrite. But the ones that we're writing now, the ones that we're going to write, some of them don't have to be there. So let what happens here be an encouragement and a warning. And say, Lord, if I'm not back to Bethel, if I'm hanging out in Shechem, if I'm where I ought not to be, Lord, God, you're warning me. Maybe it's time to stop doing some things, stop going some places, stop giving freedoms that you know are destructive.
On behalf of our pastors and staff, we want to thank you for tuning into today's video. If you want to stay informed about what's going on here at Calvary Chapel East Anaheim, we'd love for you to subscribe to our channel. Go ahead and do so by clicking the button below. We'll see you next time.